Hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Poking Around Phoenixville. I'm Lou Beccaria, your host. Thanks for tuning in. We really appreciate your taking the time to be with us. As you probably know, over the years, Phoenixville has produced a long line of professional athletes in a number of different sports, from baseball to football to basketball to boxing. Well, our show today, in fact, is about one of Phoenixville's former professional athletes from the boxing profession. His name is legendary in Phoenixville boxing circles. He's none other than Tom Marciano. Since his retirement from boxing, Mr. Marciano has kept a fairly low profile, but we were able to convince him that he still has a lot of fans here in the Phoenixville area who would like to hear from him again. So, Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you
Thanks
very
for being
much.
with
Glad
us.
to meet you. Great to have me.
Now, before you were a famous boxer, I understand you were a pretty famous sports star here in the Phoenixville area in the high school days. Could you tell us about that?
Well, I played football. I was a 135-pound guard on the football team, and I was a linebacker, and I played baseball in high school. And I lettered in both baseball and football, and I was a catcher in baseball.
Great.
And we had pretty good baseball and football teams back then. Phoenixville was always good for football. Always was a great football town.
Now, did you ever harbor ideas about maybe going on to college and playing sports back then? Or?
Well, not really. The coach seemed to wanted me to go to a junior college, but I was too interested in boxing at the time.
Okay. How did you develop that interest in boxing when, you were so into baseball and football at the time?
Well, I always liked boxing. Boxing was my first favorite sport anyway.
Okay.
And we used to do it around home. My brother and I used to box down the cellar every Saturday, and we'd box for hours. And then we'd box on the street corners. We'd box for soda. And I just loved I just loved boxing.
What was it that gravitated you to boxing? What was it that captured you?
I don't know. I guess because I was watching it on TV, and I used to watch it every Friday night on television, and I just got to like it. Yeah. And so one day, a good friend of mine, Irish Joe Rowan, we were coming to school one day, and he said to me, let's put an application in for a tournament down in Philadelphia, which the Philadelphia Inquirer is sponsoring. And I said, sure, I'll do it if you do it. And we talked to another friend of ours, Donald Greer, and he also did it too. So we sent our application in, and we got a reply back that we had to come down to Philadelphia and report to weigh in to see what division we were going to fight in and so forth, and who was going to take care of us. And I said to Joe, now what are we going to do? Where are we going to train? And
be careful what you wish for, right?
Yeah, right. And I said, I don't know. I'm going to ask my father, I said. So I asked my father, and my father said to me, go up to the Italian Club, in St. Anne Italian Club in Phoenixville. There's a fellow up there with Tens Bar, and he did some fighting in the service. His name was Frank Costello. And that's just what I did. And I asked Frank, and I told him what had happened. And I told him that we sent applications into the Philadelphia Inquirer, and we need a place to fight. We need a place to spar. And we have no manager or anything. So what he done was he set up a room up at the Italian Club for us to box. And every day we would train up there, Joe and I and Donald. And then through the years, as we went along, other kids would come from off the street and try to start boxing with us. But it had to be us three guys because we joined the Diamond Belt tournament in Philadelphia. In fact, my first fight in Philadelphia as an amateur, I fought a guy by the name of Charlie Rizzo.
Any relation to the famous Frank Rizzo?
I don't know. I didn't know that then. So the next day when I went to school, that picture was in the paper. They had cut it out and put it on a bulletin board. And I didn't know it because I didn't get the Inquirer at the time. So when I came into school that day, I see these people standing around looking at this picture on a bulletin board, and there I was fighting this Charlie Rizzo, who I beat that night. That was my first amateur fight.
How many amateur fights did you have, Tom?
I had 77 amateur fights.
Wow.
I lost 6. And I must have had maybe 28 knockouts.
Wow.
And in fact, it was ironic because in this Diamond Belt tournament that the Inquirer was sponsoring, fighters had to wear helmets.
Mm-hmm.
They never done that before. But a couple of months before that, there was a fight on television where a fighter was getting so beat up that he died that night.
Oh, my God.
Bernie Kid Perrant, and he fought Emil Griffith that night.
I remember that.
Yes.
I remember that.
Right. And so when the Inquirer started this tournament, they made sure that all the amateurs, before they got in the ring, would start to wear helmets.
Mm-hmm.
Incidentally, I was the first one that scored a knockout with the helmets in an amateur boxing in Philadelphia.
How about that?
And from then on, I started my amateur career.
Yeah.
And I fought 77 amateur fights. And the biggest thing was, as an amateur, was when I was trying out for the 1952 Olympics. I was ready to hang them up as an amateur. We were going to turn professional. And so what they did was they were having the amateur trials, the Olympic trials in New York, in Albany, New York. Mm-hmm. And Philadelphia needed some representatives to go up there to fight. So there was 4 other fighters picked, and I was picked. And my manager, Frank Costello, said to me, "How would you like to try out for the Olympics before we turn pro?"
Well, that's pretty heady stuff.
Yeah, and I said, "Okay, what do you think?" He said, "Well, go up for the ride. Just go anyway, a good experience." So I said, "Fine." So I went up to Albany, New York with 4 other fellas from Philadelphia, and when we got up there, the next day we had a big meeting, and they said to us, and all the fighters were in this room, there must have been 200 to 300 of us trying out for the Eastern United States Olympic Championship. And they said to us, the way we're going to pick your opponent is we're going to put you in your division for your weight class, and we're going to put your names in a hat. Mm-hmm. And as we pull your names out, that's who you're going to fight.
Yeah. By the way, what weight class were you at this time?
Well, as an amateur, I started out as a featherweight. It was 126 pounds.
Okay.
And lo and behold, the first fighter that I drew was the number 1 featherweight in the United States.
Oh, my Lord.
Carmelo Costa.
Luck of the draw.
Yes, the luck of the draw. He had lost 1 fight in his amateur career. He was picked to represent the United States in the featherweight division. Long and behold, I was the one to pick to fight him. And
how long were these fights, by the way, Tom? The rounds, how long were they?
There were 3 rounds.
3 rounds of...
Lose once and you're done.
Okay.
And
the rounds are what, 2 minutes, 3
minutes? 2 minute rounds.
2 minute rounds, okay.
So the first night we fought, there was an outdoor stadium in Albany, New York. It was a baseball stadium. Mm-hmm. And I climbed in the ring that night against Carmelo Costa. And I fought Carmelo that night, and I knocked him out in the first round.
Wow.
And
he was number 1 in the United States?
He was the number 1 contender to represent the United States in the Olympics. So they could not get over it. Mm-hmm. So after the fight, I went back into the dressing room, and they said to me, "Do you know who you just knocked out?" I didn't know. I said, "No." Oh. They said, "You just knocked out the number 1 featherweight in the United States." He had won every kind of championship in New York, amateur championship in New York.
Wow.
And I was, I didn't know. I didn't know who he was. Well, anyway, I started to get changed to take a shower. And they said, no, don't take a shower because you're going to fight again in 45 minutes. And that was true because...
no time to recover.
No time to recover, and I didn't know that. So I waited 45 minutes, and I was in the ring again. And I fought a guy from the United States Navy who was a Mediterranean champion. He was all kind of Navy, champion. And I knocked him out in the second round.
Wow.
And after that, I went back in the dressing room, and I started I wanted to take a shower, and everybody came back there, and they all wanted to sign me up. I was even asked by college people. They wanted me to, go to college to fight because fighting was big in college in those 1950s.
Uh-huh.
It was very big, and I said, well, I can't talk to anybody because my manager wasn't with me. I was up there with representatives from Philadelphia,
Right.
and but after that night, I called at home and I told them who I fought, and tomorrow night's the finals. I said, and they all came up. Mm-hmm. And I fought a champion from Boston, national AAU champion from Boston, knocked him out in the second round. Jeez. And they just couldn't get over it. So after that, my managers all came here, and then we went to New York City after the fights, and I met some big time promoters. They were all after me because I knocked out Carmelo Costa. So after that, I turned professional.
Okay. Do you have any outstanding thoughts about your amateur career? Any one particular fight stand out as extra special, or any particular incident?
Well, yes. First of all, in the tournament up in Albany, New York, Floyd Patterson was there. He was a middleweight at the time. Mm-hmm. And I was a featherweight. And Floyd Patterson and I were the only two fighters that had three straight knockouts, 2 in one night. They picked me as the outstanding fighter of the tournament.
Wow.
And
what a nice honor. What
an honor, because I was just went up there for the ride. So
you didn't realize how good you were until you got up there, probably.
Well, I was pretty lucky up there. I scored 2 knockouts in one night. So from there we went to Kansas City. We were the Eastern United States Olympics champion at that time. And then from there we went to Kansas City to fight in the finals. And if you won there, you would go to Helsinki, Finland to represent the United States. And I had a great experience. It wasn't a great experience, but it was an experience that I never was aware of. When we got to Kansas City, Floyd Patterson was my roommate. Mm-hmm. We got to be pretty good friends. Mm-hmm. And I recall one incident when we were going out to eat, and Floyd and I were walking up to this restaurant, and there were a lot of people in there. And I walked up to the door, and I saw the people, and the door was locked. By the time I got to the door was locked. And I'm, knocking on the door, and they kept pushing me, telling me to go away. And I said, what's wrong with these people? This place is open. And Floyd said, come on, let's go. We'll go someplace else.
Because he knew what was happening.
He knew what was going on. I didn't know. And then Floyd told me about it. Mm-hmm. And I said, geez, I wasn't aware of that, Floyd. I'm very sorry about that. Don't worry about it, he said. It happens all the time.
Wow.
So what happened was we went and ate in the Woolworth store that night.
Yeah.
And
so that was your introduction to discrimination.
That was my introduction to discrimination. That never happened in my town.
Yeah, great. Well, we have to take a break for commercial right now, so you stay here and you stay with us. We're going to be right back after we hear a word from our sponsor. We're talking with Tom Marciano, and we have a lot more to talk about his great boxing career. Hi, welcome back to Poking Around Phoenixville. I'm Lou Beccaria, your host, and we have the pleasure today to be talking with Tom Marciano about his fabulous professional boxing career growing up right here in Phoenixville. So Tom, continuing on with our line of questioning from the first half, your amateur career. Any other interesting stories that happened to you?
Yes. While I was fighting out in Kansas City, I got to meet a professional boxing manager named Steve Ellis. Steve Ellis was the Wednesday night commentator on Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Oh, yeah, I remember
and
that.
Remember that?
Yeah.
And he was the manager at the time of a fighter one of the most popular fighters in our country was Chico Vijar. And it so happened that my manager and Frank Costello, who was my manager at the time, and Steve got together. And Steve sort of signed up with us. And I got to be a stablemate of Chico Vijar and a very good friend. Up until today, I'm very good friends with Chico Vijar, who we still talk to each other by phone.
That's great. Where does he live?
He lives in Stamford, Connecticut.
Okay.
He's from Stamford, and he still lives there. And from then on, when I got back from Kansas City, I lost, in fact, the finals in Kansas City. And then when I got back in Phoenixville, I signed up with Steve Ellis, and Steve Ellis wanted me to come to New York to box with Chico Vijar. And he wanted to see what I could do with some of the pros. So I went up to New York, and I went to the box in the Stillman's Gym in New York City, the famous Stillman Gym, which you will see on television all the time. And I boxed up there with Chico a couple times, and then Steve said, well, we're going to send you down to Florida because I have a fight down there with Chico's going to fight down there. And we want you to start your professional career down there. And I said, well, that's fine. So Chico and I went to Miami Beach. And Chico fought a main event down there. And I fought undercard. I started my first fight as a professional was a 6-rounder. And
That's a big jump from the two rounders. I mean, the 3 rounders that you had as an
you
amateur.
usually start out as a 4-round fighter as an EA, but my first fight was a 6. And, well, anyway, I knocked the guy out in the 3rd round, so it didn't go 6 rounds. So, and then I fought the following week. Chico didn't fight the following week. He fought that night, first night, and then the following Tuesday I fought again in Miami Beach. And I stopped the guy in the 2nd round. And my first 2 fights in Miami Beach were knockouts. And
what a way to break in.
Yeah, that was pretty good. And they were pretty good fighters, too, at the time. We were supposed to go over to Cuba to fight.
Really?
Chico was supposed to go over to Cuba to fight, and I was supposed to go along with him. At the time, you could go to Cuba and back and come back and forth. And I don't know what happened. We never did get there. And then I started my boxing professional career, and I got back, and then I fought in Washington, D.C. I fought my third professional fight. And lo and behold, I was in high school at the time. And
so you turned pro when you're still in high school?
Yes, I was still in high school when I turned pro.
Wow. And you had those 77 amateur fights all during high school. That's a lot of fights in a 4-year period.
Yes, it was. And
wow.
In Washington, D.C., I fought by luck. They saved fights in case there's a quick knockout. They saved some of the preliminary fights to put on, just in case. It so happened that there was a knockout, and they put me on television. That was national television at the time.
Oh, wow.
And
now, what was your feeling then, being on national television?
I didn't have time to think about it.
Yeah.
I was so nervous. I didn't have time to think about it. But anyway, I wanted to fight by a decision. We came home from Washington, D.C. that night. The next day I went to school, and everybody was waiting for me outside. They saw me on television. They just couldn't believe it, that they saw me on television. And so I continued my professional career with Chico Vijar. I had 28 professional fights, and I lost 4. I had 3 draws, and I fought up around New York. I fought a lot. I fought in New York on Channel 7, which was a local TV station. I was pretty popular up there. I fought quite a few times up there. And I had a lot of fights up there. Excuse me. And that was the extent of my professional career.
Who are some of the other famous people from the boxing world, Tom, that you rubbed shoulders with? I know you've mentioned some of them, but there must have been a lot of others as well.
Carmen Basilio. I met Carmen Basilio several times. I met Rocky Graziano. In fact, I just saw his life story on television the other night. Somebody up there likes me.
Yeah.
And I knew Rocky well. I knew Tony Gennaro well. I met Joey Giardello. Joey Giardello, who was a middleweight champion from Philadelphia.
Yeah, I remember him.
I lived with Joey for 2 weeks.
Did you?
I got a little incident to tell you about Joey.
Sure. I hear about it.
Joey was originally from Brooklyn, and he was a great Brooklyn Dodger fan. And it just so happened to be we were fighting at the same place. There was a stadium in Philadelphia, Toppy Stadium. Joey was fighting the main event.
Mm-hmm.
I was fighting the semifinal. And the trainer that was training us in Philadelphia said to me, "Why don't you stay here and stay down with Joey?" And I said, "Fine, that'd be fine if Joey would have me." And Joey said, "Sure, come down and stay with me."
Paisans.
Yeah, we were Paisan buddies. So it so happened I went down and I stayed with Joey for 2 weeks before the fight. And we would get up every morning and do row work and so forth. But what's so funny was Joe was a great baseball fan. And the Brooklyn Dodgers were in Philadelphia that week. Joe was a Brooklyn Dodger fan, of course. Knew Walter Austin personally.
Really?
Yes. We drove to Shibe Park that night. Shibe Park, the old Shibe Park, 21st and Lehigh.
Lehigh, right?
Yes. And we met Walter Austin out in the parking lot. He knew Joey Giardello because Joey was pretty good fighter at the time. And he said to Joey, come with me. And you two guys come with me. Joey took me with him. And we went into Shibe Park, and they put a uniform on Joey. And Joey was hitting baseballs on the batting field there in Shibe Park.
How about that? He must have felt like he was in heaven.
He was, yeah. He really liked the Brooklyn Dodgers. But the best part was, after the game, they beat the Phillies that day. After the game, we went out with Duke Snider, Pee Wee Reese, and Walter Austin. I got to rub shoulders with those guys. And
Boy.
That was a great thrill for me.
Yeah.
And, that game, Duke Snider hit a home run that night. And Duke Snider was a great baseball player.
He sure
for the
was. I
Brooklyn
remember.
Dodgers.
Sure, absolutely.
And I thought that was pretty good.
How about some of the boxing people that are around today, even today, Tom? Some of the trainers, the managers, and the promoters and so forth. You had experience with them?
Oh, yeah. I met some. I met Russell Peltz from Philadelphia. I know him quite well. And, of course, I know my good friend Jimmy D'Uria, who was fighting, just recently retired, and who I hired as a policeman. Very good fighter in his day.
Yeah.
And
great guy. Great guy.
And I see this boy from Phoenixville, Yorgi. He's going to be a good fighter, too. And I remember fighting one time in Madison Square Garden. The first time I fought in Madison Square Garden, I fought a kid by the name of Johnny Busso. He was undefeated, and I was undefeated. And Willie Pep was fighting the main event. And in Madison Square Garden, the fighters that fight the wind-up go in the dressing room by themselves. Well, it so happened that I knew Willie Pep from Miami Beach. In fact, he was training down in Miami Beach when Chico and I were down there. And I boxed Willie Pep. I boxed him down in the gym. Believe me, that was some experience. Well, I got to know Willie pretty good. But when we fought in Madison Square Garden that night, they introduced me to him again in his dressing room. Willie said, "Come and stay with me in my dressing room," because in New York, the main event fighter stayed in the dressing room alone. But he wanted me to stay with him, so I had the privilege of staying.
Yeah.
Yes, just stay with him, and Willie Pep fought that night. We both won. I fought a guy, I tell you, Johnny Busso. He was 17-0, and at the time I was 14-0, and I beat Johnny Busso. And there was a famous ring announcer. His name was Johnny Addy. And he said to me after the fight, he said, "You beat a good fighter." He would come around after the fight, in the preliminary fighters, and he would take the gloves to pass them on to the next fight, for the next fight. But when I took my gloves off, he says, "You keep those gloves, because you remember this night.
Wow.
You beat a good fighter tonight." And that was a great experience for me.
Do you have a lot of souvenirs from your boxing career?
I
Tom?
used to have them, I don't have them around too much anymore. But I had a lot of pictures. I had trophies from the Olympics. I had everything, you know.
Tell us about the that fight. Let's go back to that for a second. Kansas City, you're fighting for a spot on the Olympic team, and you said you lost.
I got beat there.
Now, what was it about that fight that was so particularly difficult?
Well, I fought a kid from Hawaii, and he was really fast. I mean, he could move. But, you know, I put him down in the first round. And but he outpointed me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So he barely won it. That must have been pretty devastating because going to the Olympics was
well, back then, I
deal.
didn't realize how important that was. I really didn't. You know, my mind was on turning professional at the time.
Yeah.
I really wanted to be a professional fighter.
Well, speaking about professional boxing, could you reflect on your experience in the whole world of boxing back in the 50s when you were boxing and the boxing world today? I mean, is there a drastic difference in the way that the boxing world conducts itself, in the way that the matches are promoted, the boxers themselves, the way that you train? Is there much of a difference, or is it basically the same?
I find out as I go to the gyms after I quit, the training even changed a little bit in different ways. But back when I was fighting, each division had one champion. There was a featherweight champion, there was a lightweight champion, there was a welterweight champion, there was a middleweight champion, and there was a light heavyweight champion and a heavyweight champion. Today, each division has 3 or 4 champions. And it's not hard to fight for a title today.
Okay.
You get 5 or 6, 7 fights, you could fight for one of those titles.
Huh.
But when I was fighting, I was 19-0 before I lost my first fight. I couldn't get a shot at the title because there was only one champion.
Yeah.
And then you had to make the top 10 to get a shot at the, you know.
So the
So it was the competition was really fierce back then.
What created the different, I know there's the IBF, the IBC, and lots of different initials.
A lot of,
what created all that variety of titles?
I don't know what did that myself. I think Don King had something to do with that. And he's a big promoter today.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that all started. I really don't.
Yeah.
But like I said, there was one champion in each division when I started. And it was hard.
We only have about a minute left, regretfully, but I would like to ask you this, because I think you could be kind of an inspiration to a lot of people coming up, not only in the boxing world, but whatever their dream is. You had a dream to be a boxer, and you achieved it. What kind of a tip could you give to people coming up, whatever their dream is?
Well, I remember fighting in St. Nick's Arena, which was another famous stadium in New York City.
I remember the name.
Floyd Patterson was fighting in the main event. And, of course, Floyd and I were roommates in the Olympics.
Right.
And I was in the dressing room with Floyd. And his manager at the time was Gus D'Amato. Gus D'Amato was also Mike Tyson's manager. And Gus said to me, "Son, I'm going to give you a little advice." He said, "When you get to the top, you listen to the people that got you there, not to the people who you meet when you get there." That was my advice. That's my advice to the fighters today.
Okay, great. Tommy, this has been fascinating. Thanks very much for taking the time out of your schedule to be with us and to share your experiences with the people of the Phoenixville area.
Well, I enjoyed this very much. I'm glad you had me.
Good. Okay, we'll have to have you back again.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, that's about all the time we have for the show today. I thank you for being with us, and I'm sure that you've found our conversation with Tommy Marciano as interesting and as informative as I have.